Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's a Ukrainian talk show on POT TV. My name is Sasha Star, and today our guests are Professor Jonathan Lockwood. Welcome to the show, Jonathan.
Thank you, Sasha. Glad to be here.
And great to have you motivated. It's always a pleasure. And of course, Ivan Kucherenko from Kiev, Ukraine. Welcome to the show, Ivan.
Hello, Sasha. Hi, Jonathan. Hello to everyone.
Always great to have you, Ivan. First question to you. When we're talking about a fight against Russians and help from the Western countries and sometimes lack of it, and people are forgetting that all this based on heroism of Ukrainian people and their willingness to fight. If it's not there, there is no any other reason to continue the fight. But the latest figures show that well over 90%, 90% of Ukrainians want to continue the fight and retain their country for themselves. Ivan, what do you say, being right there in Kyiv? What do you see? What do you feel?
Of course, we have to fight because we know we have no other way. If we will stop fighting, then we will face the same consequences as we've seen in Bucha, as we've seen during the previous periods when Russian Empire, when Soviet Union conquered Ukraine, when thousands of Ukrainians were moved to far regions of Russia, to Siberia, when people were robbed, when families were separated, when people actually were the Ukrainian identity of people were destroyed. Ukrainian poets were prohibited. Ukrainian writers were prohibited. Even Ukrainian language, it was not prohibited, but it was modified. Some specific words or expressions were removed from Ukrainian language in order to conquer Ukrainian nation. So if Ukrainians will stop fighting, then we will face these consequences again. And we've seen what Russia did on occupied territories in Bucha, in Irpin, in other cities and villages of Kyiv region, of Sumy region, of Kharkiv region. When they occupied them, we also see what Ukrainian prisoners of wars are facing, being in Russian prison, how they are tortured, how they are pressured, and we are fighting not with civilized people. We are fighting with the savages. And the only way for Ukrainians to survive is to continue fighting. So this is the main idea and main opinion of the majority of Ukrainians. And in order to prove my words, I just want to show you a short video from recent attacks on Zaporizhia. So. Mark, please launch it.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Голову! Ранение на живот!
So Russia is using the really terroristic tactic. They are striking the same place after the emergency services are getting there in order to help those who are injured to stop fire, and they strike on the same place again, and which inflicts casualties among civilian, amongst emergency services, and it's really a tactic of terror, a tactic of savages. It's against all laws of war and all principles of war. So maybe Jonathan can give
Yvonne,
his,
as a matter of fact, Yvonne, what you are relaying to me reminds me very much of the reactions during the American Civil War during the 1860s, when in the response of Confederate General Stonewall Jackson, when they saw the destruction that the Union troops had wreaked on the town of Fredericksburg after the Battle of Fredericksburg. And the Confederate soldiers asked General Jackson, "What are we going to do about this, General?" And General Jackson's reply was, "Kill them all." And when you are faced with a fight for existence, for example, a Confederate soldier was asked by Union troops when they had captured him, "Why are you fighting us?" And the Confederate soldier replied, "We're fighting because you're down here." Very simple. I mean, when you are being invaded and your very existence is at stake, there can be no surprises. You cannot be surprised that a people is going to fiercely resist being exterminated or being made to cease to exist as a nation. So,
Jonathan, you remember the movie Independence Day when
yes,
asked, "What is it exactly do you want?" And the answer was, "To kill you." Remember?
Really? So, I mean,
outer space.
Excuse us if we do not oblige you by ceasing to exist. So this comes as interestingly enough, by the way, Yvonne, I was reading an article this morning about how Raytheon and the Pentagon, they have already increased their production of Patriot missiles. They recognize it's not just the demand by Ukraine for Patriot missiles, but many other nations in the world, seeing how effectively Ukraine has used its Patriot missiles in defeating Russian aircraft. This has encouraged other nations to want to buy Patriot missiles for themselves to improve their own air defense. So now, as Sasha admires the U.S. military-industrial complex so much, well, you're seeing another example. Weapons are us. Yeah, the American capitalist system, they're saying, okay, they want more Patriot systems. Let's give it to them and improve them. So this is all, in an indirect sense, this is good. For Ukraine, immediately, the encouragement that I gain is the absolute skill with which the Ukrainian military and political leadership are making the best use of what they have been given and the best strategy. People are increasingly recognizing the cleverness of the Ukrainian strategy to conserve their forces on defense while integrating and they're increasingly recognizing what I've been talking about, cutting off the Crimea from Russian reinforcement and logistics. And they recognize that this is becoming increasingly likely. Once that occurs, as I contend, this will be the decisive turning point in the Russian-Ukrainian war. This will be where the Ukrainians will inflict a significant and unmistakable operational defeat upon the Russian invaders. Once they have cut them off and the Crimean occupiers are forced to surrender, then Ukraine will have a freer hand to redistribute and reconcentrate their forces against the attackers in the east. And as eventually, as I predict will happen, as they gain air superiority over the Russian invaders, then the Ukrainians will have the means, along with being reinforced by other NATO members, whom, as have you noticed that that NATO is now trying to set aside $100 billion for aid to Ukraine, which will operate even if former President Trump is reelected in November, they have a backstop just in case, just in case President Trump is not willing to increase commitment to Ukraine. NATO will step in and do it for them, which, by the way, is also doubly important. During this year, before the election, it is vitally important, from my perspective, for Ukraine to sort of take the game out of other people's hands by inflicting their own significant operational victory over the Russians. And that the most obvious target is increasingly recognized to be Ukraine. The Ukrainian successes against the Russian Black Sea Fleet will continue. They will continue to marginalize and drive back the Russian Black Sea Fleet, leaving a clear path for Ukraine to retake the Crimea.
There is something else what's going on. Ukrainians are extremely successful in attacking Russian Air Force bases. And just, I think yesterday, they attacked the facilities where Russians are training their pilots.
Oh, it cut off the training base, and that really hurts them.
Yeah, this is a brilliant decision, because if you don't have trained pilots, how can you operate your aviation? Jordan, I wanted to ask you, you're aware, of course, that James Cameron, the foreign minister from England, he is now in the United States, had meetings with the Republican constituents, and as Europe, including, of course, UK, they are ramping up the military production of all kinds of weapons for Ukraine and engaging more and more in help to Ukraine, including financial and technological and otherwise. He's trying to explain the best he can to his Republicans constituencies the logic of helping Ukraine. It's not really coming something from the heart, it's coming from the logic, because US is making its stance in the world way much more substantial. And besides, all the money, what we are talking about, most of it by far is staying in United States, creating jobs, creating even more military facilities and technology. What do you think? Will that make some difference, Strip?
I believe it will make a difference as the United States encourages, by its actions, indirectly encourages the NATO members to take on a greater share of the defense and in resupplying and reinforcing Ukraine. This will make, it will render any perceived declaration by, let's assume that Trump is elected in November, it will render it it will make Trump's election to the presidency in November much less crucial for Ukraine's survival, because they have already essentially compensated for that by getting greater aid from the other NATO members. Even though Ukraine is not formally a member of NATO, that has in effect become a de facto, by the actions of the other NATO members. They are treating Ukraine as if it were an active member of NATO. They are, short of actually deploying their own troops on Ukrainian territory, which is not totally out of the question, which is interesting, because it's keeping the Russians uncertain as to what actually will happen. I mean, if the French go ahead and actually deploy, even support troops to Ukraine, it takes some of the pressure off Ukraine in being able to rebuild and resupply and reinforce their own troops. And it will make what I predict will be a Ukrainian operation to seal off Crimea and eventually liberate it this year, is what I predict will happen. It will totally throw off all the calculations on both sides.
Well, it's hopefully derail Putin's grand strategy.
Yes.
What he's saying is, in Russian, he's saying, "Я вас всех пересижу." What that means, that just by staying there and looking like a Western desire to oppose him. Sometimes it's going higher, then it goes lower. In some countries it's high, in US it's low, then it could change. And Putin is adamant about completing his strategy to conquer the Ukraine. Basically, now he's completely obsessed. It's a lifetime goal to subdue Ukraine, so then he could go into history as the great uniter of the former Soviet Union. So,
Well, he'll be going someplace when he dies, but it's not where he thinks.
yeah. Yeah. Ivan, tell me, what about you hear about the propaganda war? Because Russians are very successful to create their own lobby in United States, where they are providing that. Okay, they're sometimes conflicting each other, because on one side they're saying that Ukrainians are the same Russians and their brothers and sisters, and we want to leave us alone. Let us figure out what's the best way to continue to live together. On the other hand, what their message is: look, we know that we are barbarians. Yes, we know that. But Ukrainians are even worse barbarians than we are. So don't try to preclude us from finally to get these barbarians to table to do the peace. Now, in what Putin means by peace is a total capitulation of Ukraine. We all know that. But in the West, they sometimes they're taking it. Okay, Putin says so. Maybe it is so, but we all know that it isn't. Ivan, what do you hear about this aspect of the war?
Actually, this war started not yesterday and not even in the beginning of 2022 when Russia committed a full-scale invasion to Ukraine, and not even in 2014 when Russia annexed Crimea. Russian propaganda was always a great instrument of influence, and what we see now that they spend enormous money on bribing journalists, media, politicians. They're hiring so-called PR agencies to influence the Western society, the American society, with different narratives. Those you mentioned are only few of them. They have narratives that Ukrainian president is not legitimate because
Yeah, that's true.
because the term of his guardian is ending, and Ukraine has to commit elections, and without elections it will be not legitimate anymore, and that's actually that there's spending narratives about the corruption in Ukrainian government, etc., etc. Unfortunately, they have really great resources to do it because they have money. They have journalists like Carson who love money and can go to Russia and shoot interview with the
So-called
international criminal, actually, who is under the court of the international, under the persecution of international court, and they have technological resources like artificial intelligence, which generates a lot of artificial posts in social media. They have dozens of virtual users on social media platforms who behave like the real users. They post something and they help them to spread those narratives. And you've seen how they used this instrument when they interfered the previous presidential elections in the United States, and they have their own social network in Russia, the clone of Facebook called VKontakte, which as other Russian media are totally controlled by the government. So when they don't have great advantages on the battlefield, they still can't capture the remaining territory of Donetsk and Lugansk region. They can't withdraw Ukrainian forces from the left bank of Kherson, from Krimki. They unfortunately they are great in propaganda and spreading all those narratives. Not only in Western countries actually, but also in Ukraine, because I'm working in media. I see that when you post something about some news about what is happening in Ukraine, a lot of those virtual users, trolls, bots are immediately coming and starting to type the same kind of comments. Sometimes it's very funny to see them because they're trying to write those comments in Ukrainian, and there are mistakes which a native Ukrainian speaker can easily identify. Probably in English they have the same mistakes, because luckily the artificial intelligence and the modern technologies not yet can talk, can communicate as a real native speaker with other person. So probably if you will see those comments, take a look and ask yourself whether it's a real person leaving this comment or not. And actually Russia is great in producing fakes. Let's remember the situation which was in 2014 when they've destroyed the Malaysian Boeing in Ukrainian sky, MH17, I think. And after that, they started to produce dozens of fakes immediately that it was not a civilian aircraft, it was a Ukrainian military plane. Then that the passengers of those aircraft were already dead, and it was all the fake pictures about those bodies. The same actually they did 2 years ago in Bucha, because when Ukrainian forces were drawn from Bucha and Russian forces were drawn from Bucha, and Ukrainian forces came there and discovered all those atrocities, they immediately started to produce fakes, fake news that this was all fake scenes, that those corpses were moving, their hands were moving, they were actually actors lying on the streets and not the real corpses, and it was a theater action conducted by the NATO and Ukrainian nationalists, so-called Ukrainian nationalists. So propaganda actually is a very dangerous weapon when you have enough resources to spread it across the globe, and Russia has such resources.
Jonathan, I would like to ask you, any and every war ends in peace sooner or later. So what kind of place Russia will take in the world society after all its atrocities, lies, it's committed during this war? How they will be able to look to other people, diplomats? I can't imagine how it's going to happen.
I cannot really imagine. I cannot imagine any productive result that will emerge if Russia actually wins its war over Ukraine and subdues it and uses that as the pretext, as they say, for continued offensive against NATO nations. I mean, they've already made that very clear. So there's absolutely nothing positive that can come out of a Russian victory in Ukraine. And all the NATO members realize this. Some more clearly than others. But and so it is one of these things where, any kind of, as I've said before, any kind of peace which rewards Russia in any way, shape, manner, or form for its unprovoked aggression against Ukraine, that is not a treaty of peace. That is a treaty of appeasement. It is a treaty of peace at any price, which is something that Neville Chamberlain was notoriously guilty of when he negotiated the Munich Agreement back in 1938. He was coming back saying that he had obtained peace for our time. And barely a year later, the Nazis invaded Poland. So I have no illusions about the necessity for absolutely opposing Russian aggression in Ukraine, that Russia must be defeated. It must be rendered powerless and irrelevant. That is the only, it must be rendered powerless. And the way that you ultimately do, the way you do it is, of course, you eject Russia from Ukrainian territory. You get Ukraine as a member of NATO and as a member of the European Union. Solidify both its economic defense and its rebuilding, and its member as part of the NATO membership. And then, as I have recommended previously, the U.S. and NATO, with the active participation of the U.S. military-industrial complex, build a global ballistic missile defense system, as I have recommended for decades, and that it should have the aim, and it should really feature as its centerpiece an upgrading of the U.S. Space Force with a space fleet that is armed with laser weapons capable of neutralizing nuclear missiles in their boost phase. In this manner, the United States and NATO will be able to neutralize the one thing that Russia considers makes it a great power in its own estimation, their nuclear missile force. And by extension, this neutralization of nuclear missiles, in the words of former President Ronald Reagan, render nuclear weapons impotent and obsolete. And by doing so, you create the basis for strategic stability in the world for the rest of the 21st century and beyond.
Jonathan, I believe it would be great if Pentagon would listen to our programs and listen very carefully.
Well, you never know where this program gets forwarded. Hint, hint.
Okay, Jonathan. That's great. Gentlemen, I would like to thank you so much for today's program. There are a lot of things that we just didn't have time to cover, but we'll do it next our program. Hopefully, you will join us on Friday, same place, same time. Thank you very much. Bye-bye, everybody. Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава. Bye.
Bye-bye.